Given the significant issues facing our educational system, what policy alternatives have been undertaken to try and fix it? From 1965 up until 2002, there was minimal federal government involvement in trying to address a lot of these issues. However, under President George W. Bush, the ESEA needed to be reauthorized, and a significant step forward was attempted to try to address many of these problems. This was done through the authorization known as No Child Left Behind. A central element of this reauthorization was giving the federal government greater accountability for the schools under its purview. To do this, it needed operational measures to determine if the schools were actually making progress or were struggling. As such, it mandated statewide proficiency testing for all of its public schools. The goal was that all students would be proficient in math and science by the year 2014, with the ultimate goal to have all students be college ready and capable of competing against the global market for labor. Further, it mandated that states strengthen their teacher quality rules in terms of education and certification. With these yardsticks in place, the federal government was ready to start evaluating whether schools were actually making what they considered adequate progress towards these goals. Schools had to meet their AYP, which was adequate yearly progress. However, what this really meant varied from state to state, but ultimately, students needed to show continuous and substantial improvement on their state exams. Schools that failed to meet their AYPs ultimately could be sanctioned by the federal government. No Child Left Behind often gets a pretty harsh stigma amongst policy experts. As the program moved along, 8 in 10 schools were expected to be failing to meet their adequate yearly progress. To address this, the administration handed out waivers, allowing many school districts to skip their annual proficiency requirements. Additionally, when No Child Left Behind was rolled out, it considered all students on the same metric and lumped students with learning disabilities as well as students that have English as a second language in with all other students. This made it difficult for many school districts, depending on the number of those students, to actually meet their AYPs. It is for these reasons that many teachers viewed No Child Left Behind as being completely inflexible, and ultimately it forced the administration to pass a number of laws and executive orders to address many of these inadequacies. As such, many reforms were made to No Child Left Behind, taking into account many of the critiques against it. One thing the Obama administration did in 2009 to try to address some of these problems was the Race to the Top program. This was an innovative program that allowed states to compete with one another from funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. High-performing states and states that came up with innovative ways to address large and failing school districts ultimately competed for a significant sum of money. $4.35 billion was awarded to 11 states for education reform. This program, however, was criticized in that it made states competing with one another from funds that ultimately all states would have found useful to address its programs. Further, the states that typically received these grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Race to the Top program ultimately were states that were meeting or close to meeting their AYPs. A more efficient policy would have been one that distributed the money to the states that were significantly underperforming in the No Child Left Behind program. Ultimately, No Child Left Behind, or the ESEA, was reauthorized again in 2015 under the Every Student Succeeds Act. It modified but did not eliminate the provisions related to the periodic standardized testing and accountability at the federal level. However, it gave much more flexibility and control back to the American states over their education systems. Since then, the American states have experimented with several different reform approaches beyond No Child Left Behind to address problems in their educational systems. These included merit-based approaches of charter schools and school choice, as well as teacher quality approaches dealing with merit pay and how we evaluate our teachers. In terms of market-based approaches, the states have considered the idea that competition increases quality. Thus, if we allow the school districts to compete with one another, in particular for students and funding, this competition should breed higher quality education for our students. As such, they've tried several different approaches. First, we've seen the increase in charter schools. Charter schools are allowed to operate outside state and local school district curriculums. This gives them flexibility in what they teach and how they teach it. This allows them to develop the optimum curriculum, which can attract the highest number of students and provide an education which is desirable to the parents. Some states are experimenting with the idea of school choice or open enrollment, whereas in the past, your school was determined by the school district you lived in and your busing options. Now parents are given the option to send their children to a variety of different schools. Public schools, thus, are challenged to provide different forms of education or different tracks of learning for the students. You'll see many public schools that offer programs devoted specifically to vocations and career tracks, others devoted to specific topics or disciplines, such as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. As such, this choice of programs in schools allows parents to be discerning and select the educational track that best matches their student. Finally, we are seeing states innovate with the idea of school choice vouchers. Basically, this allows parents to take their children from the public sector and put their children into private schools. How does this work? Well, the state comes up with essentially a number or a value of how much they'll spend on each student in the state. Thus, select parents are able to take that dollar figure, or essentially a check for it, and use it to attend private schools. Most states operate under a lottery to get these school choice vouchers, as there's only so many to go around. Although we're seeing expansion of this occurring nationally, there has been some criticism over the use of school choice vouchers. Can you take that dollar value and bring it to a private school that is parochial or a religious-based school? Does that violate the separation of church and state by doing so? Further, some critics question the efficacy of doing so. Often, those families that know of and know how to actually apply for the vouchers and take part in the lottery system typically are the parents of the better performing students in many of the failing school districts. Thus, when they get the school choice voucher and take their child out of the school, it decreases the overall quality of the school. And thus, when it comes time for state educational testing and then state funding attached to it, well, it becomes a downward spiral. Beyond these approaches, states are attempting to address teacher quality as well. We've seen some states adopt the idea of merit pay. This has come out of the No Child Left Behind, as well as the Race to the Top program. The idea is that teacher pay or increases in teachers' salary should be based on their students' achievement. This idea has been both praised and critiqued by teachers and policy analysts alike. And in terms of actual results, the results tend to be mixed in terms of whether this actually works in increasing student achievement. Student achievement, however, tends to suffer from problems that are endemic to the community. Low-performing school districts or classrooms can only improve so much, and as such, tying teacher pay to student achievement may not be the best evaluative measure of how good a teacher actually is. As such, some states are implementing teacher competency standards, again, coming out of No Child Left Behind. These states are mandating different levels of education and certification. Every state, however, will be a little bit different. Basically, what does a teacher need to have to be able to teach students in the classroom? Is it a bachelor's? Is it a certificate? Do you have to have your master's? Do you have to maintain continuing education? What happens if you fail to meet these competency standards? These are all questions that states are attempting to address to improve teacher quality. Yet, this stems back to the problem of the funding of our educational system. Many school districts struggle to provide competitive funding. As such, the better or highly qualified teachers tend to go to the more affluent school districts. As such, one way proposed to help increase teacher quality is to increase the salaries that teachers just make and to attract better and more highly qualified applicants. The question is, where does that money come from?